Today I'm testing the Real Colors markers by AK, so let's get into it. You can get smaller sets or markers on their own from this range, but I got the full box set that comes with 34 markers and the printed swatch sheet, which I will get to shortly. AK mentions that the RC markers are recommended for hobbyists who are just starting out and for any experienced modelers who want to paint details or apply small base coats quickly. The durability of the paint in a marker is described by meters, and in our case, the writing allows for 60 to 70 meters, which is quite okay. The design in itself is quite comfortable to hold, and it's slightly thicker than a paintbrush. However, one of the key aspects of these markers is, in specific, the felt tip. Unlike play markers, also by AK, which have come out more recently and have a flexible brush tip similar to a traditional brush, these have a felt tip which is quite resistant and actually holds the paint better. In my opinion, it does provide an even coat every time, as long as you don't force the tip too hard on the model. So right out of the box, I wanted to test the paint flow, and I could immediately tell that the colors I was going to get were going to be really different than what's advertised. To combat this issue, I made a swatch sheet myself by literally painting some dots, lines, and squiggles on a blank sheet of paper. In this way, when it came to painting the model, I wouldn't get any surprises. And as you can see, most of the hues are quite different from not only the swatch sheet, but also the color on the design of the marker itself. To help with referencing, I would also recommend swatching on the marker's lid, where there is a specific spot on it which is perfect for this, much like in the AK paint pots, where you also have a similar spot. You might also notice different symbols such as flags, and that is because a lot of these colors are supposedly historically accurate to certain uniforms and vehicles like Russian, English, Japanese, which is also why there's a range of greens and browns. Now, you're probably thinking these are not substitutes for paints and brushes, and you're correct. They don't allow for certain techniques like wet blending, feathering, dry brushing, etc. You can still do these techniques after you lay down a base coat with the markers. For today though, I wanted to test the possibilities of using only the markers and see how far I can get with that. As I finished doing my swatches, it's clear to see that there are a lot of color inconsistencies, and also there is a massive difference in color after they have dried. So something like the gray-green looks completely green at first, but then fades into a muted tone. So keep that in mind when you first lay the paint on, as it will change. AK also recommends that for very vibrant colors like reds, yellows, and oranges, you should first paint a white coat underneath, which I did not do in this instance, but it does give you better results. The model I chose for this project includes a small vehicle, which doesn't have super small details. You can get it for free from the War Rumble website. This one was 3D printed by a friend, and you can check their Etsy shop in the links below. I did a bit of cleanup, but it's not perfect, and I also chose not to prime it, to, in one hand, save time, but also test the paint's natural adhesion, which turned out to be quite good. I did have a reference picture that I could work from already, however, I couldn't replicate it since there was no magenta or pinks available, as well as no bronze metallics. I wanted to try painting camouflage anyway, so this was fine in the end, but from what I've seen of the play markers, I know they have these options. I've just not tried them myself. So I started by painting the face with this color, and I did find it quite difficult to get into some of the nooks and crannies of the figure, since the tip of the marker is slightly too thick. But I do see this as being a problem of the model itself, also since it didn't come in separate parts, so I could paint each area more easily. On the bright side though, I was quite happy with how the paint flowed from the very first moment. It felt really natural and pretty easy to get your head around. Obviously, you do need 2 coats with a color like this, but that is certainly to be expected with acrylic paints. As an example of color variation, this color was way different than what is expected. So again, something to keep an eye on with every marker, and also the reason why the swatch sheet is really valuable. The Caucasian skin tones that I had to play with were quite nice, and you do have enough variation where you can simply start with the darkest tone all the way up to the lighter tone, and they feel like part of the same skin. I tried white on the teeth. Apart from it having the worst coverage, I also accidentally let too much paint on this area, so the white flowed into recesses and the result wasn't great. The takeaway here really is that if you want to paint up these details with markers, you have to have a really good understanding of the paint flow on them and how to use just a tip, but most importantly, forget them all together and use a good old brush. I used red-brown for the lips, but with this being another detail, I did have a lot of cleanup to do, and at the end of the day, this is going to massively increase your painting time, which is not the point of this set. Just a reminder that we are not trying to get it perfect here, we are just experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't, and hopefully that is interesting and helpful to you. By the way, I'm using a different mic in this video, so let me know how that sounds. Finally, I added a few more highlights with the lighter tones. Since the eyes are never truly white, I went with an off-white, and although her eyes were blue in the reference picture, I thought it would be nearly impossible for me to get it right with the felt tip, so I went for a basic black color with a dot of white for a simple cartoonish look. I think it came out okay after again some cleanup around the edges. For the hair, I wanted a color that stood out, much like in the reference. The closest color I had was the red. Again, for very vibrant colors like reds, yellows, oranges, do paint a first layer of white underneath. But because I'm still a noob, this is not something I was considering at this point, and that's my bad. When you first put it on, it does look quite orange, but as it dries, you'll get a more muted red. I continued adding different colors to the hair since this was a good way to try more of the markers. I don't know about you, but the 2007 Hayley Williams hairstyle is kind of iconic to me, so that was my inspiration. After the orange, I added a muted yellow, then a vibrant yellow on top, so you get all these different color transitions. I tried out this brown thinking it would give a leather look, but I wasn't a big fan of it, but that's fine. Then I used the turquoise for the goggles glass and highlighted it with deck tan and then white on top. Trying to build on a cartoonish look for the clothing, I used deck tan and only a bit of white for the highlights. I realized that the gunmetal is basically the combination of the other two metallics in the set. Overall, I wasn't too impressed by the metallics. I understand that they are supposed to be more realistic, but as they dry, they become way less shiny to the point that to me, they don't look like metallics anymore. For the kind of miniatures I paint, I really would prefer to have a gold and a bronze rather than having 3 different silver metallics. For the plane itself, I knew I was going to paint a camo pattern, and this is where the markers really made sense to me. It was super quick to base coat, even if you have to do 2 coats since it dries so quickly, it's just easy breezy, takes a couple of minutes. I do think it is much faster than using a brush, and let's say you have to do a lot of these ones, you don't have to be worrying about getting the right paint consistency and cleaning your brush and all these things. Of course, if you have an airbrush, you would probably use that, but this is just another option where you don't have to get the airbrush set up, and for the size that I'm working with anyway, I think it does make sense. So I filled in a few more areas, and I really wasn't trying to get it to look realistic at all. I tried to have fun with it, but I didn't want it to look too colorful to the point where it kind of just looked like a clown vehicle. So I needed a darker color, so I discovered this dark gray, which I think gave the vehicle a bit of a breather from all the other colors. And I used this darker blue for this box at the back, again, not to distract too much from everything else that was going on. I started doing some edge highlighting to separate some components of the plane and add a bit of interest. And I would add more, but I was scared of doing too much, which sometimes is the mistake that I see with comic book style or cartoonish kind of paint jobs, where it kind of just ends up looking messy because every single edge is highlighted, and usually it's highlighted too thick. I think these markers could still be good for that, but it's hard to get thin lines unless you do what I did here, where you draw the main lines first, then clean up with the base color. After painting some more metallics, I finally started working on the camouflage. I was looking at a reference picture, which was not only helpful to create the shapes, but I also tried to match the colors as best as possible. After I did my little doodles, I did have a second coat, and it was easy enough to do. Even if it wasn't perfect, the final effect comes out just fine. And same exact process with the darker brown. Doodle a few shapes, paint them in, and do a second coat. Lastly, I did some cleanup around the mini as a result of my shaky hands, but also not having a lot of experience with the markers. And as I was doing that, I also painted the base in yellow. I probably did like 6 coats, which is kind of ridiculous. It should have been way less if I had done the white coat first, but oh well. And then I tried doing hazard stripes with a black marker, and they came out super wonky. I was definitely overly confident in my skills, but live and learn. I did really enjoy doing this project. My favorite part was how satisfying painting with these markers was, especially on large surfaces. It just flows really well, and for that, I think kudos to AK. Even though it's not as flexible as a paintbrush would be, and maybe it's hard to reach some areas, I still think these can be really useful, and I'm definitely going to be trying more things with them in the future. I'm not trying to sell this product, this is just my opinion, and hopefully even if you don't use these markers, it gives you some inspiration for your projects. I see them being useful for larger miniatures, for base coating, for rimming the edges of bases, for painting up some details, or even if you want to do some writing details, which for me I find hard to do with paintbrushes. It just feels a bit more natural to do them with the markers. I have board games with many unpainted miniatures, and I think these will be helpful to just give them a little bit of color, paint some details, and have them ready for the tabletop. I know I could have added some washes and some dry brushing or done some weathering effects, and that's certainly something that you can do if you want to take your paint job to the next level. For this video though, like I said, I just wanted to see what I could do with only the markers. Alright, so overall experience, I'll give it a 6 out of 10 just because I felt a little bit limited with the amount of colors that I had to work with, and because obviously I cannot do any wet blending. I do think they could save you a lot of time. It does really depend on your type of project. Let me know what you think, and if you used markers before, what have you used them for and how do you find them? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and today I'm not rolling a die, but I'm hoping that you're up for a challenge. I'll be choosing a die roll from anyone that sends me an Instagram story, tags me at Roll4Paint, and that is going to decide in the next video. Editing Mars here. I didn't explain myself too well, so let me just say it again. Send me a story on Instagram of you rolling a d20 where I can clearly see the number that you get. Tag me at Roll4Paint, and I will be choosing one of the videos that I get and include that in the next video, and also the roll is going to be part of a challenge that I do in the future. Hope that makes sense. Back to the video. I don't think I'm gonna get a lot of people participating, but if I at least get one, that would be great. And that gives me a bit of motivation, and also it's a bit of a challenge. I'm Mars, this is Roll4Paint, and I'll see you in the next one.